Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Bex here today to do a video that has been a long time in the making. That is my series review for the Chronicles of Narnia. I started rereading this series in December of 2021, and I finally finished reading all 7 books in December 2024. So if that gives you any inkling for what you're about to get into with this series review, yes, it did not go quite as well as I was hoping. I had originally read this series when I was in 4th grade, so I was either 9 or 10, depending on when in the year that happened. I don't remember exactly when I read the books, but I do remember reading them then. They were books that didn't really stick with me, and I think rereading them as an adult, I can see why. When I started reading the books, I was such a sucker for following the rules that I read the first book, so I read them in chronological order. So I read The Magician's Nephew first, and I remember being incredibly bored. And then I, of course, went to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because that's book number 2, and I think this is the one that stuck with me the most. As it is with most people, it is the one that people think of when they think of this series. Now, this time, when I reread them, I decided to read them in publication order. So I started with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I will be reviewing the books in the order that I read them. A big part of these books is the religious undertones or even overtones, and I did not grow up in a religious household, so I never came at it from that angle. I always came at it from the fantasy world, enjoying that side of it. So of course I read it in that same way as an adult, though I did pick up on a lot more of the allegories now that I'm older and kind of understand more of that stuff. It's sort of my general thoughts. I can understand why I never really fell in love with this series as a kid, despite being somebody that loved reading fantasy series back in the day. It's pretty dull. There are moments that are exciting, like going through the wardrobe into Narnia, or fighting a sea serpent on a ship, or a talking horse. Those are all things that kids can love in books, but there is so much of this that is dry. The other thing that I was doing while I was rereading this series, not only prepping to do a series review at the end, I was also doing book to movie comparisons. So for the first 3 books I'll be talking about, I do have book to movie videos that I had been uploading throughout, so I will link those if you're interested for a very deep dive in the differences between the books and the films, those being the films that started coming out in the mid-2000s, and the movies that I am, especially the first 2, that I am much more attached to than these books. As mentioned, with this read-through, I started with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is the first book in publication order, but the second book chronologically, and this is the one that everybody would know. It introduces the Pevensey children, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. Lucy being sort of the centerpiece of this book. She's the first one to go through the wardrobe into Narnia. She meets Mr. Tumnus. I really did enjoy their relationship in this book. I'd say the first 2/3 of this are quite fun and whimsical, and it's enjoyable to enter this world with the Pevensey children and kind of see what they have to deal with. Edmund with, Jadis the White Witch, and eventually Peter and Susan coming in and sort of being skeptical of this world and not really believing it. So I liked that part of it. There was a charm to it, but I do feel like the last 1/3 of it was a lot heavier. It started to get bogged down in sort of the religious aspect of it, those allegories, and I do think that the kids feel watered down. I mean, this book was published in the 1950s. I believe it was published in 1950, yes. So there is that sort of watered down feeling of these kids not having full personalities, sometimes the way they talk to each other doesn't even sound like how I think kids of that time would have talked to each other. So there is that aspect of it, but I do think there is a charm to this book, at least in the first 2/3, and it does sort of open us up to the potential for more stories in this world. You can see how you can really build from this. I do kind of see how this one really sticks with people, and I do think the film is very well done. So as I mentioned, if you want that deeper dive, I will link my book to film comparison for this one. But yeah, this was 3 stars. It had some elements to it that I enjoyed, but it still was not something that I would rush to pick up. And it's, even today, I don't think I would necessarily hand it to a child and say, you need to read this. It's so good. The second book published, so the second book I read, was Prince Caspian, and this one does still follow the four Pevensey children, but we have the new character of Prince Caspian and learning his story. So we're kind of following, for a while, we're following the Pevensey children returning to Narnia many, many years after they were originally there, and then we are also following Prince Caspian and his story. And the difference with this one that I enjoyed was that this book got a little more political because Prince Caspian is having to escape because Miraz is going to kill him in order to, you know, take over the crown and everything. So there's political conversations and a little bit more political maneuvering that's happening in this that me as an adult really enjoyed. Another side to the politicalness that I enjoyed was the duel between Peter and Miraz. I thought that was written well, and I also appreciated that the kids seemed to have a bit more of a personality in this one. You know, we had something to build off of in the first book. I felt like they had improved. Now this one, of course, is not as nostalgic because it's not the story that everybody knows so well, but I really did enjoy meeting all of the different creatures. Reepicheep is definitely a standout character, but I also just love all the different names of the other creatures that Prince Caspian meets in the woods, and then the Pevenseys eventually get to know as well. What I will say about this one, it is still 3 stars, and part of that is because it really follows a similar arc at the end to the first book, in that there is this battle, and once again, Peter and Edmund are involved to some degree, but then Lucy and Susan, as the women, are not involved. They're off to the side. And also we don't really get to see the battle at all. It's sort of glazed over, and so there's not a ton of action to read about or get invested in. It's more the build-up and then mentioning some things and then the after effects of that. So because we had, once again, build up to this big battle, we didn't really get to see it. Once again, the girls are off, sort of separated from, you know, the horrible things that happen in battle. It felt boring because it was the exact same sort of thing again. If you want to hear more of my in-depth thoughts about this story in comparison to its film adaptation, I've linked that video for you to go check out. The third book, and the final one that falls under my book to movie videos that I've already made, is The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and this one is where things improved for me, finally. Now, improved means 3.5 stars. It's still not a stellar book that I would immediately recommend to a child, but I do think the plot of this one is really good. So in this book, we are only following Edmund and Lucy of the original Pevensey kids, but they're joined by their cousin Eustace, who is arguably one of the most memorable characters of this entire series because he is so insufferable at the beginning that I think people remember him because he is so hard to read about. The 3 of them end up meeting up with Caspian and Reepicheep. It hasn't been that long since they were last there, a couple of years, and they are picked up by Caspian and his crew on this ship, the Dawn Treader. And they're on this journey to find these lost lords, and so the plot of this is really traveling to these different islands sort of outside of the Narnia that we know and just seeing what they find on these different islands. And so I think that's why I like this one a bit more. I think it's tied for my favorite book of the series because of how good the plot was, and I was excited to see what was going to happen on each island because, of course, I didn't remember. This one didn't get more religious-y until maybe the last 4th of it, which felt like the longest so far that we've gone, where we're just having a good time before I sort of felt like we were getting smacked over the head a little bit. And that did slow things down, of course, but I do think this one had good character growth, especially with Eustace, because as I mentioned, he was so insufferable at the beginning, but then through the things that he experiences while being in Narnia, he turns into a much better person at the end. So that's a good thing to see in what is supposed to be a children's book. The other big thing that stands out for me for this book, and that's sort of a negative, in addition to the more religious-y aspects of it, is that there are really no women characters. It's a lot of dudes, or at least male-leaning characters, with the animals and whatnot. And even also the person that Caspian marries at the very end of the book. They never even mention her name. She doesn't have a name in the book. I think she was, you know, it was retroactively mentioned, like if you look online on Wikipedia or whatever, she does have a name, but in the book they never give her a name, and I was a little offended by that because you know, this book is of its time in that way. But I was like, come on, you couldn't give, it's just Caspian's wife. You couldn't give her a name. So those two things annoyed me about this, but overall this does have the best plot of all the books, and there is something to enjoy in here that's sort of beyond those more typical elements that you see, just because we are island hopping and running into all this cool, fantastical stuff. The fourth book is where we officially leave the Pevensey children behind, but we do carry on with Eustace. So now that we've gotten to like Eustace a little bit more because of Don Treader, we get to follow him in the Silver Chair, and he brings his schoolmate Jill along with him. They end up in Narnia a number of years later. Caspian's still alive. He's King Caspian now, and his son Rillian is missing, and so the two of them end up having to go try to find out what happened to Prince Rillian, and they end up teaming up with this marshwiggle called Puddleglum, who is, in my opinion, the best character of the entire series. He was so entertaining to read about. I feel like C.S. Lewis probably had such a fun time writing this character because Puddleglum, first of all, is an excellent name. Marshwiggle, like that's what's fun about this book, is these names and the series in general, like the names that these different creatures have. Like that's so fun, and it fits so well for a children's book. So I really enjoyed that. And yeah, following their adventures in the wildlands of the north. So we're going into a new area that we haven't been to before, so that was also fun. Traveling in those wildlands, the characters got to meet giants and witches and so on, and I really appreciated that Jill got to participate in the more dangerous plot, because previously, especially in the first two, whenever something bad was going down, Susan and Lucy were sort of sequestered off on this side plot, whereas this time Jill got to be really involved, and so I liked that a lot. I will say, one thing about this book that confuses me is, why is it called The Silver Chair? I really felt, in comparison to the other titles so far, that this felt really irrelevant. The Silver Chair didn't seem that important overall to the story, so maybe I kind of missed something there, or maybe he was just trying to go for a title that wouldn't exactly give something away, but I thought this was sort of a weird choice in terms of what to call this book. It did have a bit more of those religious undertones, more like overtones, in this one. And while the plot was fun, it wasn't quite as good as Don Treader. So this one ended up bringing the overall back down to 3 stars for this one, back from that high of 3.5 with Don Treader. Book 5 is the first one where we are actually going backwards in the overall timeline. The Horse and His Boy takes place during when High King Peter is in power and the Pevensies are ruling over Narnia. We are following Shasta, who grew up and is living in Calormen, which is a country that is south of Narnia, and Shasta's not treated very well. He sort of dreams of escaping, and when he ends up meeting a talking horse named Bree, who has been forced down to Calormen from Narnia, the two of them decide to escape and try to get back to Narnia together. The plot for this one is quite fun because they are escaping out of Calormen into Narnia, so it's very adventurous. So I enjoyed that aspect of it. However, this is where things start to get uncomfortable with this series, and that is the racism. The racism is so bad in this book. Aravis, who is a character that we meet along the way, she's the only person from Calormen who is shown in any real positive light. Every other Calormen is described as dirty, slave-owning, child-marrying heathens. And what makes this awkward is that there's a lot of kind of Arabic Indian influences. I'm kind of glancing down at my notes here because I was just like, rolling my eyes, cringing, it was very uncomfortable to read at points. It's so clear that like what the Calormens are sort of based off of And so to see those Arabic Indian influences and then have every single one of those characters except for one be described in such a negative light. The only person who had any positive traits from this country was Aravis, and that's because she teams up with our main character. And so to read that was definitely uncomfortable. And I wouldn't necessarily want a kid reading this book just because of how blatant this racism is. It's not good. And so for that reason, it's 2 stars. This one really, yeah, takes a fall because there is a lot about the plot that is fun, but in terms of the racism, it's so bad. The 6th book, the second to last book in the series, is The Magician's Nephew. And I did not have high hopes going into this book because I remember when I was reading it as a child, I felt incredibly bored by this book. However, reading it as an adult, the first half of this book is so good. So you are following Diggory, who is the magician's nephew, being referenced, and his neighbor Polly, and they end up discovering these new magical worlds because of Diggory's uncle Andrew and these magical rings. So alongside these characters, you see the creation of Narnia. Like, you witness the creation of Narnia. You meet Jadis before she is the White Witch, and there are just a lot of references to earlier books, particularly The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that are just very satisfying to see as somebody who has read so much of the series up to this point. The first half of this book was 5-star children's book / middle grade material. There was engaging characters, exciting build-up, adventure. I was having such a good time. Once Narnia is created, the religious-y part of it really kicks in, and that's when I started to not be as interested in it anymore. It started to get much slower. We have this really heavy Garden of Eden imagery, but that first half, if the book had stayed in that sort of direction the entire time, this would easily be the best book of the series. Getting to see the creation of all of these things makes you feel like you're in on the secret, and learning that Diggory is the professor that we meet in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That was so fun to see. However, because it couldn't keep on that same trajectory that I really loved, and it had to get religious-y and kind of get watered down and slow down a bit, this one ended up dropping to 3.5 stars. So this is the other book that's tied with The Voyage of the Dawn Treader for my favorites of the series, and keeping in mind that my favorites in this case are 3.5 stars, so certainly not something that I'm going to be telling everybody to read. The final book in this series is The Last Battle, and wow, we did not go out with a bang, we went out with a whimper. This book is so bad, and I was incredibly frustrated reading it. So I'm gonna have to reference my notes for this one because there were so many things that I was noticing that were pissing me off. So in this one, we are following King Tyrion, and he is King of Narnia at the time, and we are witnessing the end of Narnia as we know it. Jill and Eustace arrive to help against the Calormenes, who are invading Narnia based on this false god narrative, which is where my first issue comes in of this ape. We open learning about this ape named Shift. What was his motivation for lying about Aslan's return? You know, that was the first thing that I was just kind of feeling a bit skeptical about. Also, way more blatant racism in this one with the Calormenes. They talk about their breath smelling like onion and garlic in a negative way. I mean, I enjoy onions, I enjoy garlic. This was not meant to be taken in a positive light. The dwarves call them basically like a slur, and multiple times. And when I was reading this book, I was going, wait, that is a slur, right? And yes, it is. It's not one that we use often anymore, but at the time, no. So that was really awkward to read. And then there's brown face as well. I forgot about the brown face until I was reading my notes. The racism just gets turned up to another notch, especially with the repeated use of this slur. And then we get into why does he hate Susan so much? C.S. Lewis has never seemed to like Susan that much. She's always the one who catches the shit, even though Edmund is the one who betrayed them originally. So in this book, I apologize because I'm getting into very specific things with this book, but you're basically just, you know, seeing the downfall of Narnia, but there's so many annoying things that are happening in here that frustrated me, so I have to get it out. This is like a little therapy session for me. So yes, why does he hate Susan so much? At one point in this book, you get to see the 7 Friends of Narnia, which is sort of an uplifting moment amidst all this sort of sadness that's going on. And Susan is not one of the 7 Friends of Narnia, and they insult her so much during this time, like making her be this typical late teen young adult woman obsessed with makeup and all this. It's so insulting. We're getting into spoilers here, but like she's the only one in her family that's not dead and getting to go to this version of heaven or whatever, and no one seems to care. They're all just like, yeah, Susan, she's so shallow. She doesn't deserve to go to heaven and be with the rest of us people who have been tied to Narnia for so much of our lives. And then of course, Jill had to be kept out of the main battle again. Backtracked on that. We had Jill actually getting involved in the dangerous plots in the Silver Chair and whatnot. But in this one, nope, doesn't get to be in the main battle. Dogs are shown as being loyal to King Tyrion, who is the guy that we're supposed to be rooting for because he's, you know, on the Narnian side. But there was one cat that was shown in this huge group of animals. One cat that was specifically called out, and of course that animal was on the Chlormine side. So apparently C.S. Lewis does not like cats. Like, that's what I got from that, is that he's a dog guy, not a cat guy. There was only one sort of redeeming moment that I noted, and that was seeing Reepicheep and Mr. Tumnus again. Otherwise, the plot was so dull, and it was offensive. It was racist, offensive. I was pissed on behalf of Susan, annoyed on behalf of Jill. So yes, if it's not obvious already, this book was a one-star read, and it just makes me so mad because I had spent so much time getting to this final book and reading 6 other ones and just hoping that something good would come out of this, especially after The Magician's Nephew being one of the more enjoyable books of the series. To have it end like this was so frustrating and disappointing. I'm just annoyed that this book even exists at this point because it was just horrible. It was horrible. So yes, unfortunately I have to end on a very negative note because the last book was just that bad. Unfortunately, there's no way around it. So I apologize if I've just like ruined somebody's childhood memories of these books. I would not really recommend these books to kids these days. Maybe Dawn Treader because the plot's a little bit more exciting. But in terms of like the horse and his boy and the last battle and how the, you know, Chlormine people, the Chlormines are written about, it's so bad. Like, I don't want a kid reading that. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of time that we let these books sort of just disappear. Maybe the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe will always be popular, I think, to some degree, but I think there's plenty of other books for kids and middle grade readers these days that are better for them to get their hands on. So if you have any thoughts on these books, if you read them as a kid or you read them more recently, let me know what you thought of them down below. There are some cool moments, like Bree talking horse, really cool. You know, the sort of whimsy and the fun, fantastic side of the original, like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that book. That was really fun. The plot and the adventures of Dawn Treader. Eustace's character development is great to witness, and he does become a character that you do really root for. Reepicheep, you know, there are fun moments in this, but man, does it get bogged down by some dull stuff. So yes, definitely share your comments if you have them down below. As always, all of our links are in the down bar. You can check those out if you feel so inclined. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you later.